So hello everyone, I'm Cristina Caffarra and this is Escape Forward, the space where I had the privilege of moving forward indeed from what was my original domain, antitrust and competition, and to have conversations with people I like a lot, I find fun, interesting, and I learn from.
So the discussion today will go again into digital sovereignty. As many know, this is something I'm very involved in. We're looking at it from different perspectives, and the discussion is I'm looking forward to because it is a perspective we haven't had before. Really, the discussion of sovereignty has taken a sharp AI turn, really, in the last few weeks. As we live through the model pulls by Anthropic and various chaotic moves by the US administration, which really have fostered major concerns around availability of models, around frontier models, and prompted many European fans of frontier models to suddenly wake up to this ghastly prospect that somehow we may be deprived of these amazing toys for a host of reasons, from capacity constraints to security to leveraging, but they are seen as irreplaceable, and this has created a lot of reaction, as we know. And in fact, two major reactions in my view. One side has been pretty much a strong, very vocal plea to politicians, policymakers, that we simply cannot do without these models. We need in Europe to do absolutely anything in our power to secure access to these frontier LLM top lab models, because all sorts of horrible things will happen if we don't. And the suggestion is of a trade in which we essentially secure access to these models in exchange for some sort of inducement, incentive to hyperscalers that host these models to build, for example, giant amounts of data centers across Europe, give them energy cheaply, give them permits, and so on. And then another reaction has been a pretty aggressive backlash against the sovereignty movement that I'm involved in, with an argument that in the sovereignty movement, we don't have a real plan for how Europe is going to become an AI power. And as such, we are essentially not very useful, we are feeble, we are useless, and so on. I think both of these kind of reactions are wide off the mark. I think I call the call for doing deals in exchange for model access as AI maximalism. I have discussed this with a number of people I certainly like Luis Garicano and others, who do genuinely believe that we should be doing these deals. My position is, of course, that they entrench and worsen the position of dependency that Europe finds itself in. And I do not see this trade with the devil as having any positive upside for Europe. So I think I want to pursue some of these themes today in various ways, from various angles, in particular with someone who is not really steeped in the sovereignty conversation, but of course is very knowledgeable about the AI world, indeed, including running a business which is premised on a lot of AI as the objective, but also using it in the business. So Yariv Adan, you're welcome. I met you in Davos, and I was very struck by the presentation, the discussion you led in Davos about your vision of an AI world, which is very different from many that I have been familiar with. I mean, we all know and like Gary Marcus at Citron and Brian Merchant and their view of the world, but you have a much more, what I would call, AI optimistic view, a very positive vision, which I thought was interesting and different, and really painted a picture of AI as something which is not necessarily just something to be feared, to be concerned about. The whole bubble bursting concern, of course, is there, but very much something that will be integral part of our lives in a way that will improve much of our lives. and sort of, to some extent, relieve us from centuries of toil and thankless labor. Why don't you start? Of course, you've been, in the way of your background, originally doing startups in Israel. Then for 17 years, you've been with Google, building AI, and director of product management, Google Assistant, and Google Lens were some of the products you led on. So very extensive experience at Google, which will surprise some people, given my history with Google. Google even sued Texas over me, as you know. But this is another part of Google. It had nothing to do with you. And now you founded a venture in Zurich, Ellipsis Ventures, which is investing in early stage AI. But interestingly, and I want you to discuss it, really works on the basis of agentic AI in a big way. So over to you. Just give us the positive vision before you go and talk about how you use AI in your business, and then we'll talk about sovereignty.
Yeah. Thank you for inviting me. I love hearing you, and having a conversation with you is a privilege. So thank you so much. And these are fascinating topics. Yes. So I actually I started with giving talks to people about AI in the business world, so forth, and I got like the question so many times, but what about humanity? So I took a kind of step back and really thought deeply. What do I think about AI and humanity? And I think you pointed, I'm very optimist. Early stage investments, you need to be an optimist in the sense that it's very easy to see all the ways something can fail, but you need to find the ways that it can succeed and kind of follow that path and make that thing happen. And in a way, I think that's a little bit of my DNA. Like you said, I'm a builder. I was building stuff at Google and in startups. In order to do that well, you need to be an optimist. It's always easy to say, hey, it won't work. The hard way is to see how it will work. And the reason I'm an optimist about AI is I think like three main areas that I see optimism. Other people are actually seeing a risk. First, I think what AI does, and many of us are worried about, that suddenly this intelligence is being controlled by a few giants and so forth. But the flip side of that is actually that the cost and availability of very advanced intelligence suddenly becomes a commodity, a utility that anyone can access, and especially anyone can access from their phone. And luckily, AI is coming after the internet and after the mobile revolutions. That means that everyone across the world today has access to phone and to internet. So anything that AI can do, at least in terms of digital intelligence, people have access to that. And if you think today, intelligence costs a lot. If you want to go to the top doctors, limited time to scarce resource. So very few people have access to it, and very few people can afford it. And this is like, again, medical doctors, or this is like, really good shrinks and business consultants, and basically, lawyers, anything that actually requires expertise today is limited. And if you suddenly open up that to the world, I think we're living in a much better world. So I think like first the commoditization and the fact that you can deliver intelligence across the world at low cost is great news for humanity. And I think it's even more than that, because I was recently invited to a discussion, is democracy ready for AI? And everyone had kind of in the back of their mind, social network, fake news, blah, blah, blah. I think that humanity doesn't need the technology to generate fake news and horrible religious, political, and other theories that leads to genocide. We've managed to do it thousands of years before electricity. But when I look at what are the real problems of democracy, not the phenomena of the problems, what is the core? It's inequality in access to basic services. I think it's in education. I think it's in the fact that people are enslaving themselves. And I think it's in the fact that governing organizations are both corrupt and inefficient. And I think that AI actually has the potential to touch on all of these, to close the gaps on basic services, like I said before, just by offering it at a much lower cost, much higher availability, lower scarcity. I think education is one of the things that can be completely revolutionized. I think one of the biggest problems in the world starts from that we have one teacher for 30 kids. So the first thing you teach the kids is to shut up, hold their arms, sit on the chair so we can actually manage the class. So you kill any curiosity or free will or spirit when they're like 3 already. If you can actually shift resources and use AI over there and recreate an educational system that actually works and can work everywhere, I think that's just. I think that if we take the capabilities of AI to monitor the governments, to see what they're doing. Imagine you put a microphone now in every meeting, every law that is being written, anything that the government do, and it highlights this is not what you committed, this is against this and that, and measures them and publishes it. Can we, maybe even delegate some of the administration to AI? I think it's much more transparent and powerful, and so forth. So I feel like AI has, but I think democracy is not ready, because I think instead of governments starting thinking, how do we revolutionize our education system, our health system, our governance and administration? Instead, they're trying to regulate stuff that I think there is no chance and it doesn't add value. So I think, like, again, here, the things that I'm talking about have a lot to do with the stability of our society and making it in a better place. And then I will tie to another, like, a lot of people are concerned about, AI is going to take jobs and what will people do? And I'm not trying in anything that I'm saying to minimize some of the risks and the importance of working on them, but I'm saying there is also a flip side. I argue that we have been stealing jobs from AI rather than AI is going to steal jobs from humans, in the sense that I think humans are doing work that they shouldn't be doing. And it's always hard to do it when you are born into a situation. You assume that whatever is happening here and now is the way that it should be. And any fluctuation from that is so scary and dangerous. But if you move a little bit, like, 40 years ago, there was no startups, there was no email, we were completely disconnected, the pace was slow, right? It was a very different workplace. If you look a little bit in other continents, it's very different. I always like to go 150 years ago and think about people working, what we currently think of horrible, working in these factories, every day, all their lives. And imagine someone coming, kind of the guy from Plato's cave, and telling them, wait, I have an invention from you. I saw the light, and the light literally looks like light. It's electricity and mechanization. And then everyone would say, no. What will we do with all of these people that their purpose of life is sitting in these factories and producing? They are contributing to the society in this way. And you say, no, but actually, why do you need to start working from the moment you're born and until you die? I imagine a world where you study until you're 20, and somehow we figure out how, when you're 65, you stop working and the economy takes care of you. Why do you need to work 7 days a week? I imagine that you can work 5 days a week, and maybe not from sunset to until, sunrise to sunset, but for, only 8 hours, and you take 30 days off every year. And then people will say, but what will they do? And they say, they will have hobbies and they will have a life, and families will spend time together and eat breakfast and dinner together. That would have sounded crazy. And I think, like, in the same way, I imagine a world, why do we need to start working at 20? Why not at 40? Why do we need 40 hours? Why not 15? Why 30 days? Like, and if people really need to go to an office and pretend they are working, because we know they're doing already today busy work, we can always, like, kids go and pretend they're, like, they have, like, I'm in a kitchen, or we can make pretend. People go to a pretend office and pretend they have a mission in life. Although many of the people I know in the offices are not happy. So I think, like, again, we need, I don't underestimate, that suddenly if you don't have a job and we need to solve for that. But I'm saying it's a better place, actually, if we work less and shift these resources into education and other places where human is needed. So I think, again, when we have more time, it goes up to the first one. And just I'll say the last point on my optimism, and then I'll shut up and let you ask. But I think the third, so I said, like, okay, we're going to have intelligence as a utility, which will contribute to the stability of environment, better governing. Actually, more time is a better world. And I also think that the other thing, and it's very clear now already, our apish brains have peaked. We have actually reached a point where we are struggling and getting very slow and ineffective in solving some of the most complex problems. And we've seen, for example, we had an epidemic. It took us quite a while to actually find a drug that can help us, and it's unclear until today, how efficient that was. And of course, we are dying and we're getting old, and climate keeps surprising us, and people are dying. We didn't solve energy. We are kind of stuck in space. We visited the moon a long time ago, and it takes a long time to get it back to it. We are very slow in deploying robotics, although we need them, right? So a lot of these very complex problems are very hard for our brain. But I think that AI, which is not exactly like our brain, but has some advantages, I think can break the glass ceiling on where we are on kind of semi-chaotic, on very complex problems. And we have some poster child examples of protein folding that then unlocks a bunch of stuff. Drug design, people are, I think like recently, people said, oh, it is 32, we're not going to die anymore and stuff like that. And there is so many companies working on a materials for better energy and so forth. So I think like suddenly humanity can solve problems that were impossible and actually are critical for making this a better place. And I just want to say, I think it's so funny. I think a lot of people have the wrong reaction to AI because it's artificial intelligence. But it's like as artificial as the nest that the bird builds is artificial. Like it's part of us, it's an extension of us. We should think about AI as part of things that like, that there is, it's the same atoms. And it's an extension of humanity, and it's just humanity becoming smarter in a way. Sure, there are still risks in fire and in pencils. People have done, horrible things using pencils, but we need to learn how to use that. Yeah, that was my long speech. Sorry about that.
But your vision of this expansion of the realm of possibilities, right, that it allows is not limited to, we will be able to do routine jobs in a way that is less demanding. Indeed, we don't need the mass of workers doing summaries of the literature or summaries of what's existing or doing some boring processes. But you are really thinking of a much broader set.
Yeah, well,
in terms of what
we until now we haven't been designing drugs. We've been discovering drugs, right? Like there is no engineering in drug building. We're like dying from diseases because we don't understand how our body works, and we cannot create proteins that actually operate as we like. We aren't tapping into space, right? Like, we're like killing the resources of a single planet in an infinite universe. The utilization of energy is super low. We don't understand, like, what the weather will be more than 2 weeks. We cannot anticipate actually, weird stuff in the weather, that is like today. Like we're like so basic in certain ways that I think like in 10 years ago, we look back and we'll just not believe in it, right? Like, we die much faster than we want. We're suffering for so many diseases. We do not control the geopolitics. We do not understand the economy and what controls it. We're victims of so many things because we don't understand them. Yes, like there is so much headroom here that is low-hanging fruit. Like, and I don't understand why everyone is worried about that. We will automate some pencil and paper work. Yeah, I don't think that's interesting. Yeah.
But I must ask you this, though. There is so much discussion around the downsides and the fear narrative around it, and the concern about humanity losing its nature. So you don't see any of that. It is including at a more prosaic level, concerns about this is a bubble, it will explode, and it will kind of take us into a recession. So how do you position yourself relative to these other narratives?
I don't, again, I think there are bubbles within this. I think, I look at it Like, the way I coined it, like already 2-3 years ago, I called it commoditized magic. And I think that's a very confusing state to be in, because usually we were used until now that commodity and magic are opposite. Magic is scarce to the degree maybe doesn't even exist, extremely valuable, cost a lot, and you're lucky if you can use it. And on the other hand, commodity is something that anyone can do it and you compete on price. And suddenly these models are definitely magical, in the sense that things that even experts, not 10 years ago, but 2-3 years ago, definitely 5 years ago, would say, oh, completely impossible, will not happen. Suddenly you can do it, and this is very valuable things. On the other hand, it's completely commoditized in the sense that you can have it for $20 or $200 a month, right? Like, and everyone can access it via the phone, right? So we have this thing that is fast moving, very useful, is clearly intelligence, and again, doesn't need to be perfect and so forth. There's a lot of issues with it, but it's definitely much more efficient compared to the alternative. Um, so I think that that's a very confusing state of being. And it's very disruptive. And whenever something is disruptive, and whenever, especially when people with a lot of power are invested in the past, it creates a lot of cognitive dissonance, right? So where do I think there is a bubble? I think that at the moment there is a huge opportunity to automate inefficient human processes in a way that there is a huge margin to be taken. So you actually deploy in legal, engineering, whatever it is, and you're replacing a human process with an AI, you are actually saving millions very, very quickly. However, and then people are used to translate, oh, that is a recurring revenue. But I argue, no, that's not recurring revenue. Once you automate the process, if it is based on a commoditized technology, the baseline for running it is the cost of actually running that automation process, right? So if you have a company that did it and now is making money because it was an early mover, but there is nothing sticky here and there's nothing defensible, eventually margins will go down. So if you are estimating them based on previous laws, then you are in a bubble. I think that in the past, if a smart entrepreneur identified a problem that is valuable to a large set of customers, and they managed to move quickly and build a solution and get first to market, that was a recipe for a very successful startup or a unicorn. But in these days, when they are built on a non-defensible technology, and when there are hundreds or thousands of other teams that can do the same thing with very little resources and expertise and moving fast, that's not the case anymore. And if you are making investments based on the old rules, then you are creating a bubble. So I think there is a bubble in that sense, that there are certain companies that I don't think are reflecting their future values, or even they have a right to exist as a large player in 5 years from now, and there will be a correction around that. So this is kind of the commoditized side of the commoditized magic. But I think there are other companies that are solving problems that are extremely large in the trillions, like, in the drug industry, in the energy industry, stuff where there is real scientific, technical, industrial modes with real data modes. I think that unlocks a lot of value. And I think, like, in that sense, there is no bubble. And I also think that humanity, for whatever I said, doesn't care whether it's valuable. So I think the value for humanity is clearly not a bubble. I think the fact that humanity will be in a much better place 5 years from now on the aspects that I described, that's not a bubble. I think the economy is under threat because our entire economy assumes the opposite. Our entire economy assumes that in order to generate value, you need this very large industrial corporate that is very expensive to, on OPEX and CAPEX, so you need to raise money from the public to keep it running. And we are all invested in that market. Our many of the pension are invested in that market. And we know that actually the reality of the markets change quickly. If you look today's market, 40% is 7 companies that didn't exist pretty much before the internet. Microsoft did. The other ones didn't. So if 15 or 20 years from now, most of the power is actually by companies that don't need that CapEx and OpEx, or maybe it's centralized by 5 companies that control compute and energy, what happens to the economy? So that freaks me out a bit. But I think that this is like 15 to 20 years ahead. So I'm like, okay,
we'll figure it out.
we'll figure it out.
Someone will figure it out.
Figure it out, yeah.
So I want to move on to talk about how, from this kind of broad landscape, you have organized your fund. I mean, you invest in AI startups, but what is interesting is not just the kind of targets that you focus on, but the way in which you've actually set up the fund, the business, essentially with a bunch of agents running much of the analytics. And you and your partners essentially at the top of the pile, but this is, I think, an unusual extent to which your business is effectively deploying agents. Tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, so we basically put our money where our mouth is, and we actually started from a place where we said, hey, we really want to remain, from a VC, a founder-led, like, that a GP-led fund where we do not want to sell our fund to our investors. Oh, well, these very great, smart people from Google, and we did companies and we sold them and so forth, and then have junior people doing all the work. So we wanted to keep the organization small, but then of course you're limited but how much you can do. And we strongly believe that if we build our organization as an AI native organization that is built on AI, on first principles, we could actually enjoy both worlds and basically have two people running an organization that is like, I don't know, 30, 40, 50 people. And it took us a while to build it. We are now in the 5th generation. And I think like one of the key things that we did is that we were not thinking about how are we going to automate ourselves, or not how do VCs work and how do we automate them. Because we believe that if you try to automate people, you'll get maybe a 1.5x, 2x optimization. What we did, we took a step back and we said, if AI was running VC, how would it do it? And then you get the full power of AI. And we basically split the world. We said, okay, we have two problems. One problem is from all the startups that are currently happening in the world, how do we find the 10 people that we should speak with this week? So that was kind of one system. And then the second system, we said, once we speak with these 10 people, how do we converge quickly to a decision, yes or no? And the realization was one that it's basically a loop of basically, let's look at everything we know, what are the gaps and questions that we have in order to get into a yes-no decision, close these gaps, and loop until we are comfortable. And this is something that AI can do very well. And if you model something and you think in principle how AI can do it, you can leverage the fact that it operates at great scale. You can leverage the fact that it works 24/7 and so forth. And funny enough, we built this system, and then we realized that we have enough data to also build marketing agents on top of that, investment relationships and operational agents. Funny enough, we gave a talk about it, and then we start having inbound requests from other funds asking us, that, oh, wow, the system is amazing. Can we actually buy this system from you?
Right. I'm aware of that. That's why I wanted you to describe it.
Yeah. And then we said, okay, we don't want to, that's not our business, but we had a bunch of students working for us, and we actually gave them the code. And they are now operationalizing it and taking our system and customizing it and making it available for other funds. Yeah. And it's interesting because we were trying to think, okay, where is the human required in the process? And should we have a sub-fund that is completely automated? And also we were trying to, at first we were automating only ourselves. And then we were trying to think about, can we do beyond that? So for example, we said, what if we had the best investors in the world working for us? So we actually did a little bit of deep research. We asked who are the best 50 investors in the world in similar stages like us, or really early stage, deep tech AI. And then we collected all the information that there is on the web. And there is a lot of available information on the web from podcasts, from expos, and from other stuff where they describe how they think about investment, how they choose teams, and so forth. And we basically created a virtual investment committee that works for us. So we actually have these top investors. We created profiles that I believe are more consistent with their thinking than they're in reality. And they have all the information that we have. And then they run. So at random, we choose one person to lead the investment. He presents it to the other agents. Then they have a first discussion. Then they argue. And then they conclude. And they give us their feedback and action item. So the cool thing is that...
So the agents discuss, right? And then they give you the output.
But these agents are replicas of real world top investors. Yeah, so basically we get kind of a second opinion from others, and it's very interesting to see because different people look at the deals in a different way. So again, I think AI opens, allows you to take any idea that you have and I think, make it into a reality. And the other principle that we had is AI is going to be much better than the human alternative long before it's good or great. And that's the question we always ask ourselves. It's not that we ask ourselves, is this perfect? Which I think in many cases slows down AI adoption. But we ask ourselves, if we didn't use AI and we kind of use the human, what's the value that we would get? And of course, when you look at the economics of this automation, at the end, for an early stage fund, the economics are very simple. How many deals can you see? How fast can you move? And at what quality can you do that? So these are the things that we're like super rigor in measuring and making sure that we score high on as we do this automation. And I can tell you that, yeah, we're definitely at a very efficient level.
So this is fascinating to me, but this is one user case, which is specific, as you said, in some dimension. The business model is relatively simple, but of course very smart. And of course, you, with your background at Google and being in charge of much of the AI there for years, are not your usual CEO of a company. But there is at this point, this enormous appetite, which is exploding in boards everywhere for agentic AI. Everyone is talking about, we need to have this, we need to have it tomorrow. It's got to be a priority. It's got to happen. And the impression from talking to boards is that they haven't the faintest idea what it is that they're talking about. They're trying to feel around. They have some very approximate notion. This embracing of AI, and particularly the agentic dimension of it, is in the beginning, because when I talk to people, this is just now on the board's agenda in the last 3 months. It's really exploded in the last 3 months, but it is very real. And how do you see this process of adoption ultimately taking place in Europe in particular? The US may be a different world, but are boards who is advising these boards? It is a bit of a murky world of consultants, and sometimes you ask yourself, well, what do these people know? I mean, they're going around selling advice and they seem to be the blind leading the blind. Seriously, how do you see how Europe is proceeding and how we'll do this adoption of the application side? We're going to talk about models in a bit.
So first, I actually don't think it's what we're doing is simple. I actually think it's very complex compared to where there is a ton
that's what I mean.
There is a ton of low-hanging fruit in any organization by automating the back office and the front, the go-to-market, right? Like, marketing sales, right? So both saving and increasing your revenue. I think there is a ton of stuff to do over there. And then just like, kind of managing the hygiene of how the organization works. So I actually think there is so much simple flows that if you properly automate and delegate to AI, you can actually save a ton of money, be more efficient, and scale your go-to-market operations. Yes, I completely agree with you that most companies don't have the right people with the right understanding on making these decisions. My tips for people are, first, develop the muscle. I think that if I look what is blocking a big adoption in large organizations, and I would separate between things that are already ready for adoptions and others that are not yet ready. I think there are still some definitely technical challenges that need to be solved to completely make organizations to run on AI. But like I said, I think the low-hanging fruits are actually ready. I think organizations don't have the right talent, don't have the right skills, don't have their data in place, don't have the right processes. They cannot operate at the speed that AI requires. And I think even if you know what you're doing and you're putting a good plan in getting the talent and all of that, even in a decent organization, given the size, I think that's a 2-year roadmap. But I think that within that 2-year roadmap, you need to start developing the muscle. So my first recommendation is for organizations, don't worry so much about the ROI and how much you're spending, and manage it to a reasonable degree. But I think the strategic threat is being disrupted and becoming irrelevant. Not spending money on AI. I think that's a tactical thing that you need to take care of. So I think spend the next 2 years to really develop the muscle, understand what it means to use AI, and just really encourage people to use it, to automate it, find within the organizations who are the right people and the right leaders that can do it, what are the right tools, what are the things that work. Don't try to be too top down and don't over optimize. There is so much to learn. So that would be one big tip for these organizations. 2, educate yourself. Really go and find who are all the cutting edge startups that are operating in your space. There is so much, even in very heavily industrial, right? People think, oh, I have I'm producing something physical, I'm protected. I'm saying no. First, like I said, other companies that automate back office and go to market have a huge advantage of you. But then there is a lot of startups that are looking how to improve your R&D, how to automate your engineering, both software and hardware, how to automate and increase the R&D, actually the research. There's so many, self-driving labs and co-scientists and stuff like that, robotics and whatnot. So really, I would encourage these boards, go and meet the startups that are actually operating in your space, understand what they are doing, understand what they're offering, understand how might you partner with them, whether, be as a customer, acquisition or whatnot, but just start having the educated a view of what is actually possible, because these guys at the forefront, they're the ones that actually understand the vision, not the consultants, as you say. So really, if you're not spending every day a meeting with a founder operating in your space, and your space is both kind of your area of expertise, but also startups in the generic kind of hygiene of running a large company, I think you're not doing your job. And that's where you will actually open your horizons on what happens. Yeah, so these are...
But Yariv, let me jump in, because and I know that many boards will not say, oh, I got to talk to a smart startup. The knee-jerk reaction is I got to go and talk to Google, Microsoft, and Amazon, and Gartner and Capgemini, who will recommend the 3 above. And everything is contained in that bubble. And therein, we go into my sort of final topic, if you like, but one that I cannot help spending time on, because I'm grateful that you suggested that people should inform themselves and talk to the people who are the small guys and they understand what they do. Query which infrastructure do the small guys run their models on is also a question. But I want to get now to what I I hold very dear, because this discussion around AI transformation in the last few months is coming exactly at the same time. And in fact, it is intersecting this big European aspiration for sovereignty, for capability, not in an anti-American way. We discussed it many times, and I don't need to go there again. There isn't any anti-American sentiment, as you know, in me, but it is much more, we need growth, we need value capture, we need European assets. We cannot be building everything on somebody else's assets. And so let me lay out a little bit where I think the inevitable European dilemma lies. And I know, again, you and I have discussed it before, and I remember you telling me it's tough. You guys, it's tough. And it is tough. But at the same time, I refuse to accept that a place like Europe is and will remain forever a colony when it comes to these things. So I think where in terms of setting the scene. So we have, on the one hand, the European Commission, and they're these nice people who tried to aspire to give us the ability to effectively train frontier models, all of these HPCs and Gigafactory, etc. This stuff around training is not, at the moment, something which is terribly interesting, much as they tried, they underfunded it, and it's not going to deliver very, very clear answers. But I'm more interested in what we were just talking about, which is inference. So you need compute for inference, for all these agents that people are going to start running around. And for that, essentially, it would appear that the reason everyone is so anxious is because the default are the frontier models that come from the top labs that are bundled with US cloud. As we know, the top labs are bundled in their distribution with the top cloud, Google, AWS, and Microsoft. They're not even available on European cloud, these models. European cloud has got open weights, and it's not really these models. So this is really the origin of the anxiety of everyone out there who says we must do any deal with the devil to ensure access to these models, because without them we are completely over. And that is one position. I'm not saying it's a fact, but it's the fact that these models are truly bundled with American cloud. And so you have the siren calls of people, as I say, who therefore push for Europe to do these deals, which I think are incredibly dangerous because they are at risk. In fact, they imply further entrenchment. If we say, okay, in you come, you get all these permits, you get cheap surplus French nuclear energy, and you can build all these data centers across Europe in exchange for you giving us access to these models, that is a terrible answer for anyone who cares about European sovereignty. So there's that, and there is the chicken and egg problem, which, again, I'm laying out the issues. We know what the problems are. I know lots of people in Europe who are willing to build data centers, and they tell me, Cristina, I don't have a problem even with funding. I can get funding from private funders. The issue isn't money. The issue is demand. If we are at the beginning of this adoption cycle of AI, and at the moment the demand that exists is entirely captured by the hyperscalers who are actually bundling the models with their cloud, if I'm a European trying to build a data center, which demand have I got that I can actually sell my capacity? Ultimately, I have the answer is you can become, Microsoft can be your tenant. Good luck. And so this is really the risk of taking these construction projects when you don't yet have enough demand that's going to come your way is also what holds Europe back. That said, and I'm not asking you to create an answer, but I do not accept that the only possible future is the one in which we need to absolutely capitulate to this destiny. I had a conversation here, you're aware of it, with Andreas Liebel of Munich. He was very much of the view that, yes, we cannot accept that frontier LLM is the only thing. There are other architectures that are possible. They're not quite as proven, but Europe cannot give up. So sorry for the lengthy introduction, and I know this is my baby, and I care a lot about it, so please treat it gently.
No, it's yeah, at the end, it's all about risks, right? And also, we're saying Europe. There are so many different players here. Are we talking about what should governments do, what investors should do, what should small startups do, what should industry do, right? Each one here has a very different role, and then it's also at the end, taking kind of my investor, it's a risk game. Right? To your point, you're saying, hey, there is a risk where we will not have access to the latest and greatest model, right? And I'm saying, okay, that's a risk, and I assign to it, some number. I think that for running most of SaaS, I don't need the latest and greatest model, to be honest. And then there is the risk of me using a smaller player that goes bankrupt, or using models that are 100% of the time not as good. Right? At the end, it's a question of risk game. I think there is an interesting, what we've seen ever since the cloud thing, that a lot of companies are looking at kind of as an insurance, saying, okay, I'm still using the big US, but I need as an insurance also fallback in case. And I think, funny enough, the two leading winners of that are Mistral and Cohere. Funny enough that Canada, the 51st country, is the big winner of that.
A sovereign play, indeed, with
But,
Canada.
And my biggest, complaint on Europe is a little bit like this person that prays every day to God, help me win the lottery. And then God says, did you buy a ticket? Right? Risk. It's like trying to solve the problem, but without willing to make the risk. Anthropic and OpenAI are making huge bets and huge risks. In the computer they are buying, they can go bankrupt if they are wrong. The others as well, we need, if Europe wants to do it, Europe needs to understand that it needs to move as fast, that to take the risks that are as big, because you cannot be super conservative and also take long term. And I think especially now, I think Europe dug itself a very deep hole, and there is no magic solution in the near term to get out of it. And then the question is, okay, what is a strategy that is short-term? And maybe the short-term strategy is the thing that you don't like, and saying, okay, let's ensure what assets do we have? Okay, we can control and tell these guys, if you want to be present here and make money from our own European things, okay, we'll give you the energy, but we need to see the risk that you're saying, and we need to make sure that we are not creating it, just deepening the hole, and in parallel build the mid and longer term solution here. And also, I'm a big believer in think big and act small, in the sense that, Europe at the moment is so behind on multiple levels in the game here. First, like you said, there is no cloud compute infrastructure. Then there is no frontier models. Then there is if you look at how many startups, leading global startups, are happening in Europe versus happening in the US, we're so behind. And then there is if you look actually at the governments and the industries in Europe, how much are they willing to take risk and bet on European technology versus go the easy way and buy the US technology? We're so behind. So I think
yeah,
I think
all of this I know.
Yes. So
all of this I know, and it is the endemic problem. Let me just, I can't help but debating some with you, because I think what you call potentially a short-term solution is horrifyingly unacceptable and dangerous, because I think that these contracts are in any event not enforceable. If you enter into contract that say, we want model access in exchange for you carpeting Europe with data centers, they will say, yeah, sure,
Well,
we'll sign this piece of paper.
I agree with you. I'm not saying, I'm saying that.
And it is completely unenforceable. In addition to which, this is one-way bets. They got in and they carpeted Europe with data centers, and we're out of the door. So Europeans are not there. We are entrenching further. We are further colonized. I mean, you need to make a judgment that access to this model is so absolutely existential that it is worth trading ultimately agency and ownership and control for. We would not control these assets. You have layers of infrastructure that are not controlled by us.
But I would
and that
question
is
you,
not acceptable.
like, can you stop that? Like, what's the mechanism to forbid that in a democratic, open market, to block from all the different players in Europe to offer that? So I'm saying, how can we focus that energy, not to try to stop that, but what needs to happen quickly to think deeply the alternatives? And the other thing I would think, is if I am betting, if I look back on the internet and mobile and social, the companies that were big in 1999 are not that big anymore. Like, should Europe actually come and say, instead of worrying about automating the giants of today, can we focus on the giants on tomorrow that currently are very small, right? Like, let's find the top and most promising startups. Let's bet on the future. Let's see how we can support the compute and model. And I think it's an easier problem. And I think it's a bet. It's a risky one. But if we have conviction that the leader, that the landscape will look much more different, it's a smaller problems. That's a direction that I would like to look.
I mean, I think there is no question that no one in the sovereignty movement kind of believes that we can go to the mat with American labs and create an alternative in Europe. The conditions aren't there. Europe is not going to suddenly create an alternative, throw billions and trillions at it. This is not in the realm of possibilities. On the other hand, there are other things that Europe is focused on, which is, potentially smaller model for different applications. Not everything needs to be a frontier LLM. That said, I hear it. But do we need these models for every conceivable application? Certainly not. Not to do many things.
Yeah.
What is the gap between these and what is perhaps a couple of steps behind?
I tell you, my thinking. I think there are two opposing powers. I think that, to me, I think there is a huge advantage in having this, super powerful model that then you can, of course, distill from it specific things. By the way, when you have a super powerful model that you spent, trillions into training, distilling from it, specialized, cheaper, faster models, assuming, that the data exists within that and they're spending a ton of money on the data, is easier. And I do think that the stack is getting much simpler, right? Like, if you look today, the SaaS stack, it's very complex. And then it allows for many players and for a lot of advantages. I think the future stack is very simple. And unfortunately, it relies a lot on ability to do compute extremely efficiently and intelligence extremely efficiently. And these are the places where the frontier models and the hyperscalers excel. I don't see how to escape that. I think.
But this is like saying that this kind of scaling kind of architecture is.
I think that at the end, most of the value, in my opinion, will be captured in the compute and in the, call it, core intelligence. I think then there is a second question of when you do inference, can you be either a market for more players? The inference, is a very different game on how to serve that. And of course, over there, you want to utilize all the possible hardware. You also want to
Right.
extend the lifetime of hardware, so I don't need every 2 years to buy the latest NVIDIA and stuff like that. I want to be able to run stuff locally. So I think there is a lot of advantages to run not necessarily on a hyperscaler, right? Like,
Right.
and
That's why I meant
I think there is a
inference.
real opportunity here. The way I would approach it, with a pragmatic, is to come and say, okay, what are the first verticals, players, companies, segment, geographies that are best set for success to start that game as kind of an arrowhead or landing beach, to start building it and then expand. Like, I wouldn't try to come with a plan to solve everything, come and say, okay, I'm betting on running inference on any kind of, and there is already a lot of companies looking at it and kind of saying, how can you manage your small hosted group of computers as if it's Google hosted? There is a lot of them, when you don't have the skill, when and you don't have the hardware and so forth. So I think that's interesting. And to be honest, my knee jerk has been when companies told me we're doing this because of European regulation or European availability. I don't think that should be the reason. I come from an intelligence background. And in intelligence, you always separate between capabilities and intents. Because a capability, whether someone can or can't do something, that's usually something that changing that takes very, very long. Intent, whether someone wants or doesn't want to do something, it's a flip of a coin. You cannot bet on that one. So I think whether, European companies or others want to adopt American or don't want to adopt American technology is something that can flip in a day. Suddenly the president changes or God knows what happens. And, so I think like a company that advocates to run stuff locally or whatnot should have a solid business case and value that is super competitive compared to whatever hyperscaler or other can offer, even when they are competing against each other. They should have a strong reason. If they don't have a strong reason, I don't believe they have a good reason to exist. The fact that we are Europeans, I as an investor don't like it. I think like, there is some kind of backwind that supports it now, but how long will it last and so forth, I don't know. And I also believe that at the end, price, availability, and comfort, you cannot compete with it. If something is better and cheaper and easier to access, at the end we'll do it. And yeah, maybe I will have.
Yeah, but I mean,
So that's
yeah, but I mean, as you know, as you know, the insistence on or the focus on Europe is not unconditional. So, I certainly do not advocate that we adopt certain solutions just because they're Europeans. I feel very patriotic about a European, but there needs to be a business case, and cost and efficiency need to play out. I mean, there's no question that these things are as important. But at the same time, I think, you may feel that this is not something which may have durability, but I think my perception going around Europe as much as I do is that the vision that Europe needs to power itself up and reduce its dependency is very, very established by now. And so whether we have the capability and the intent to act on it, I don't know in full, but there is a big shift. I mean, seeing where I am, the mountain is shaking.
But again, it goes to risk, right? Like you're always asking, okay, who controls this? And what's the risk that something bad could do? Geopolitical is one risk, poor operations is another risk, bankruptcy is another, there's so many. And yeah, and I think like, again, like, when you look at, if you look back 10 years and you're saying, oh, how many things that we took for granted 10 years ago suddenly, completely flipped 180 degrees. If I had described to you some of the geopolitical things that happened in the last 5 years, 10 years ago, you tell me you're crazy. So as we think, 10, 12 years ago, I think a lot of things can slip. And I definitely agree with you that there is a clear a trend of concentration of power in the hands of very, very few. and regardless of where they are. And that's scary for companies that their existence depend on it. And I think that companies need to think very, very seriously about what do I do in such a world? What is my primary strategy? And what is my kind of insurance policy here? And maybe I cannot be without an insurance policy anymore because the risk is so immediate. And I think, again, I think it's very different, and it's very different for countries that understand that AI now is part of actually and the basic security and infrastructure of that company. It's very different from whoever controls energy as a resource. I think it's very different for the large companies. It's for venture. And I think every one of them should understand that, yeah, geopolitics, the concentration of power, the dynamics of US versus Europe have changed. And you cannot ignore it, to your point, at least for the time being. And I agree with you that I think when I actually speak with many people are like, they're not even thinking about it. And I think that's idiotic, and it's a train going into a wall. And I think what you're doing of raising awareness, calling bullshit, making the conversation educated, getting the perspectives from everyone around, and like not letting go with populist answers, I think it's the way to go. Yeah. This is why I'm here. I'm a big fan.
This is the note to end on, a bit of praise. I love it. Listen, we've spoken for over an hour, so I think we cannot speak any longer, but I never feel that, when I speak to you, an hour passes quickly. So I want to thank you very much. I think this was fascinating for me. Great to have you, Yariv Adan. Thank you very much.
Thank you.